Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the first of a series of 3 recruitment webinars for this year's class of CCST Science and Technology Policy Fellows. Today's webinar is on why the CCST Fellowship. My name is Sarah Brady. I'm the Deputy Director of the California Council on Science and Technology and also a Science Fellow alum. I'd like to open our webinar today by acknowledging that I am presenting to you from the tribal land of the Nisenan people. Sacramento was a gathering place for many local tribes. We acknowledge the Southern Maidu people to the north, the Valley and Plains Miwok peoples to the south of the American River, and we'd also like to honor the Patwin Wintun peoples to the west of the Sacramento River. Today, I'll briefly introduce CCST, provide an overview of the fellowship, and then open the floor to hear from the 3 amazing panelists we have today. The California Council on Science and Technology is a nonpartisan nonprofit established over 30 years ago at the request of the legislature. CCST was created to provide science and technology advice from the wealth of outstanding academic and research institutions in our state directly to policymakers. California is lucky to have such an incredible network of expertise, and our job at CCST is to turn this expertise, translate it into actionable advice for policymakers. We do this through a number of mechanisms, including expert briefings, workshops, and peer-reviewed reports. And of course, we run the CCST Science and Technology Fellowship program, which is why you're all here today. So we recruit, train, and place 15 PhD scientists and engineers for a year of government service and leadership training in the executive branch and legislature. The current class of fellows is our 13th year. We've trained over 140 PhD scientists and engineers in policy, and this fall we'll welcome our 14th cohort. Applications will open December 1st, and the fellowship begins on November 1st, 2023. Though we have limited opportunities for some fellows to start earlier than November 1st in the CCST offices. So why apply? As a CCST Science Fellow, you get to learn about how government and decision-making happens firsthand by being in the room and learning from experience. You get to apply the skills you've developed in your research and training and extracurriculars to help advise policymakers and impact policy. Finally, this is a year of professional growth and exploration and transformation as you try something new and learn what it's like in a policy environment. You might also be wondering, why California? You do not need to have a strong California background or connection in order to apply to CCST. You just need to show an interest in learning about California and serving the state. The work you do in California has implications beyond the state. California is a leader in many policy areas, and the state's policies are often replicated in other states, at the federal level, and other countries. Also, the work you do as a CCST Science Fellow impacts a state that has nearly 40 million people, and as California policymakers like to say, is the 5th largest economy in the world. So let's dig into what you can get out of the fellowship a little bit more. As I've said, as a Science Fellow, you'll be placed directly into a government office, either in the legislature or the executive branch, in an agency, department, or the governor's office, and you work as a full-time staff member of that office. The fellowship is a direct, experiential learning experience to participate in policymaking firsthand and see what it's like being in the room where decisions are made and having a part in those conversations. Now, alongside your work of being in your placement office, the program will give you the support and training you need to be successful. Prior to placement, you'll go through a month-long policy boot camp to learn the ins and outs of California and the policymaking processes before you begin. During the fellowship, you'll participate in seminars and workshops to expand your network and learn new professional skills. We also sponsor field trips to enhance your understanding. It's been really nice to get back to being able to schedule these in-person events this past year. And you'll receive mentorship from our alumni network, including me and the panelists that we have here today, all of the alumni who have gone before you. So speaking of our alumni, the vast majority of alumni go into policy-related careers after the fellowship, and many stay within California state government, either in the legislature or the executive branch. Our alumni express that this fellowship experience has been instrumental in their career development and opening up opportunities and next steps that they would have never known about had they not done the fellowship program. Here's a quote that expresses the sentiment. The fellowship will give you the structure, the training, and the access to help you build your career path. If all that sounds really, really good to you, you might be wondering what we look for in a fellow. We're looking for individuals who we expect to be able to thrive in the fast-paced policy environment. This is a big culture change from academia and requires you to be excellent communicators, team players, adaptable, and willing to learn. We'll be looking for these skills in your application materials and interviews. So if you're still thinking about applying, let's talk about the timeline. The application for the 2024 cohort opens this coming December. You do not need to have your PhD in hand by the application deadline. You just have to have a plan to finish it by September next year in order to be done before the start of the fellowship. Interviews for the fellowship are in May, and the fellowship begins November 1st. So again, for the past 2 years, we've been able to have a handful of fellows start sooner than November 1st by working in the CCST office on expert briefings, workshops, and other policy work before the boot camp training starts in November. So please do apply, even if the November start date is not ideal. Thank you so much for attending today, and please connect with us on social media and follow up with any questions with Renee Cashmere, our Fellowship Program Manager, or I, via email if you have any questions or concerns we don't get to in today's conversation. Now, I would like to turn it to our panelists for the Q&A session. Today I have with me 2 alumni and a current fellow who are here to share about their experience in the CCST Fellowship. We'll have lots of time for audience questions. Please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and we will prioritize questions in the theme of why the CCST Fellowship, since we have 2 future webinars on what a day in the life of a fellow is like and on the application process. So panelists, I would love to have you introduce yourself and share why you applied to CCST, why you chose the fellowship, and how did the experience compare to your expectations? Andrew, would you like to kick us off?
Sure, I'll go first. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Dawson. I'm a fellow this year, so I'm still in the process of finishing up my fellowship. Why I applied to this fellowship? So I actually got my degree in California. I went to UCLA where I did work on lithium-ion batteries. My placement office is in the Senate Housing Committee, where I work on analyzing bills that have to do with housing and homelessness for the state. And I think one of the big key features of this fellowship was having state government experience, but also really wide-ranging impacts. And that's kind of the reason why I applied for this fellowship. Like Sarah said, California has a huge economy and is really a national and world leader when it comes to a lot of interesting policy implications and experimental policy. So it was really exciting for me to be in a place that has a lot of funding for unique policy, but also is willing to kind of experiment with different types of policy solutions. And the state government in general acts as more of an experimental policy workshop, right? Versus the federal government, which provides a lot of funding for state governments to do these types of things. So that's kind of why I really applied for the CCST one. And I chose this kind of for the reasons I gave, huge economy, huge amount of resources, but also really interesting experimental policy work. on the ground level, where I could really interact with communities and people on a personal level. And my expectations were I just wanted to dive into a new adventure, right? My work was in materials chemistry, and now I'm doing housing and homelessness. So I just wanted to try something new, do something very complicated and complex. And it's been amazing so far, working with so many passionate people in the Fellows program already, but also just in the state government. Everyone I worked with so far has been amazing to work for and really, really exciting and passionate about what they do. So having those conversations and really being involved in conversations on policy has been really rewarding, and that's kind of what I've gotten so far from this.
Thank you, Andrew. Debra, would you like to go next? If you could introduce yourself and then share why you chose CCST and how your experience did or didn't match your expectations.
Good morning, everybody, and I guess good afternoon for people further on the East Coast. So my name is Debra Cooper. I was a 2015 fellow. Prior to joining the fellowship, I got my PhD in neuroscience from Emory University, and then followed that up with a short postdoc at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas. When I came here into the fellowship, I was placed in the Senate Office of Research, and later went through a few different positions throughout the legislature, and I currently still work for the legislature. I'm the chief consultant for the Assembly Committee on Human Services. And so why I chose the fellowship, while I was in grad school and during my postdoc, I was really interested in science communication. I recognize that in the academic setting, we often do our research, go to conferences, talk to other academics, come back, get ideas, and go back to the lab. And it's just kind of a little bit insular. And so I really was interested in how the research that we do actually gets implemented and gets outside of the academic sphere, and decided to do that, to pursue a career in that direction in science policy, specifically getting that research out and seeing how it interacts with policy and gets implemented for people on a day-to-day basis. So that was my decision, that my reason for applying for the fellowship. And now being in policy for 8 years now, I've seen that and so much more as far as how research can interact with policy.
Thank you, Debra. Nichole, would you like to introduce yourself and share why CCST and how the fellowship did or didn't meet your expectations?
Yes. So my name is Nichole Holm. I did my PhD at UC Davis, so pretty close by, and I studied human genetics and genomics there. I decided to do, and in the fellowship, I was placed in the Assembly Committee on Water, Parks, and Wildlife. Currently, I am in a policy fellowship in Washington, D.C. through something called the American Society of Human Genetics and NHGRI, which is an genetics research institute at NIH. So it's a very long current status update. But as to why I applied to CCST, I was very fortunate to be at UC Davis, where geographically it's very close to the Capitol. And I attended a CCST informational session my first year of my PhD. And that was my first exposure to the idea or concept that scientists could go into policy, and that was an interest that I had. And as much as I had begun my PhD knowing that I wanted to work in a translational space and figuring out what that would look like, that was the door to me understanding that policy was an option, and my interest in that could be bridged and merged in that way. So it was a seed planted very early on, and I was very excited to apply when the time came. And it is a fellowship that stands apart of other fellowships for many reasons, and I'm happy to go into that, especially as I'm in a fellowship right now, so I have a great comparison. But it definitely far exceeded the expectations I had, and being in a fellowship now on the federal level, I could not be more grateful for the experience of CCST, because it is really unique in the way that it really mentors you through the experience. You're not thrown into the deep end without a life jacket or a boat nearby to help you if you need it. So it's really great for all of those reasons. And also they have such fantastic relationships with all the placement offices that chances are very high that you end up with a great group of people there as well. And it's such a refreshing experience coming out of a variety of different experiences in academia.
Thank you, Nichole. So let's first reminding our attendees today, please submit your questions in the Q&A. We really want to make sure we're hitting on things that you are thinking about, that you want to know about before you decide whether or not to apply when the application opens. So let's start with one question. Andrew, maybe I'll go back to you first again. What sort of things did you do as a grad student that turned out to offer transferable skills when you started the fellowship?
Sure, yeah. I would say a lot of the soft skills I gained in grad school were really important to my fellowship year. So again, I was a materials chemist and now I work in housing and homelessness. So there's not a lot of like hard science skills that I gained that were totally helpful in housing and homelessness. I did do a couple EV charging bills, so there's that. However, there's a lot of soft skills, like presentation skills are incredibly important, right? Being an analytical thinker. So like, I could read scientific papers and understand, the concepts that they're trying to get behind from a scientific standpoint, or what are they actually saying in the paper? Like, what is the data actually saying? Or what are they saying in the results section, Understanding how that has policy implications. And just having conversations with people on a really analytical high level, right? Asking people where their data come from, why is the data like that? Or questions as to how does this affect this community? How does this affect another community? And I'd say those are the main things. And that's been really helpful because a lot of people love that here in Sacramento. They really gain a lot from the experience and just asking questions and trying to analyze what bills are helping people. Why are they helping these certain types of people? How can we include everyone in this? And it's kind of just more of the soft skills of presenting and analytical ability that's really helped me so far.
Thank you. Debra, anything you would add?
Sorry. Yeah, I would say jumping off with the analytical skills, I think, that's analytical skills and communication are really tied together and very important. I would say while I was in grad school, as I mentioned before, I was interested in science communication. And so with my role in grad school, I was researching drugs of abuse. So I would go to junior high schools, community events, and talk about the reality of drugs and how it affects the brain and the body and dispelling myths and everything. And I really enjoyed that. And that really translated into this policy role in the world and everything in fellowship. And that I was able to analyze the information and still take that information and explain it to people who don't do science on a day-to-day basis. And so you have to have a special level of understanding of the information and an understanding of how to explain it in such a way that other people can understand it. And I take one example also from my fellow year. There was something I was working on, and there was this number that kept on going around. Everybody was saying that this thing was 99% effective. And it just set off a light bulb in my head. There are very, very, very few things in science that are 99% effective. And I couldn't, no one was, anytime they would refer to something, it was never, the initial article. And so I had to do a bit of a deep dive to find where this 99% number came from. And it was, just a long story short, that was not an accurate description of what the data were saying. And so I ended up writing a memo and explaining what the research actually shows and what it actually means, which was not 99% effective. And so those sorts of things, while that wasn't, exactly neuroscience and having to do with drugs and everything. It's still using that analytical mind and being able to explain it to people.
I love that example, Debra. Thank you. Nichole, anything you want to add?
I think they both covered it very well. I think that a lot of the skills and ways of communicating in graduate school are different from the way that you would do it in this setting, in the policy setting. It's not as detail focused and into the weeds of everything, but a little bit more big picture. And so if you find yourself often thinking of that big picture when you're in a lab meeting or in one of these other settings and wanting to talk in or enjoying when you get to talk at that level, I think that's a good indicator of a tendency to be able to communicate in a way that's really beneficial in the policy setting.
Thanks, Nichole. I'm going to keep the mic with you, so don't mute yourself. I'd like to go to our first question from the audience, which is, can you elaborate on the placement process? Is it based off of your interests, CCST's interests? Kind of give a few high-level details about how that works.
Yeah, the placement process is actually a really great experience, I found, in that it is one where you, as a fellow, interview with all of the offices that are open to accepting fellows that year. CCST organizes the interviews for everyone. You can say if you've done you do a brief interview for a few minutes that gives you kind of an idea of if you really want to say no, and I don't want to interview with that office. So you can exclude any from the list that you have a really strong feeling about, but otherwise it's great to meet with all the offices. And then at that point, the offices submit a list of the fellows that they really felt that they got along with, and then you submit a ranking list yourself to CCST. All of that goes to CCST. You don't see the other side of it, and then they work some magic for a bit and then come back out with your placement. And I will say that I was surprised with my placement office. It was one that I had not thought aligned as much with my goals, in that it wasn't as much in the policy spaces that I wanted to really dig into more, but it taught me so much procedure and process with truly like the best mentors I've had in policy so far that were within that office, that I look back on my placement so fondly. And so as going through placement now, where I had to do it all myself, I had to reach out to every office in the Senate and House of Representatives and say, hey, I am a fellow. Do you want to meet with me? That was much harder than CCST helping and assisting through it. So as I have this, I will often probably like point out a comparison as to like how different fellowship experiences might run something like this. And I think that that was a really fantastic way of getting you to introduce to everyone. It also is you end up kind of like speed dating everybody, and you get very good at introducing yourself. By the end, you get very comfortable with those kinds of conversations. It's a good overall experience.
Thanks, Nichole. Andrew, do you want to add anything? You just went through this less than a year ago, right?
Yeah, I would say it was a lot of fun, actually. I had a really good time meeting everyone. And it's actually a really good way of connecting to a lot of leaders across California. So I've even gone coffee and talked to people that I interviewed with that I didn't actually get placed with. And they're all great people. So that's a really great way of connecting with people across the state. I would add one more thing in saying that there are more placements than fellows. And so then you never have to like it's never really an issue in terms of like finding a place that fits you the best. And it's not very nerve-wracking where you're like, what if I don't get placed? Like, you'll always get placed. All the offices are great. They have a partnership with CCST already. And a lot of the time it's really the office trying to convince you to work for them or really want them versus you trying to convince the office that you're amazing. They kind of already know you're amazing because CCST has been around for a long time and they know the amount of people that come through the organization.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, our alumni network is one of the main reasons I think that interview processes go so well, because alumni can offer a lot of advice to the current class of fellows, and a lot of the placement offices not only are familiar with the fellowship, but have continued to work with our alumni over the years, right, after they transitioned out of the fellowship. Debra, can I go over to you for the next question? Can you share a little bit about a typical workday as a CCST fellow? Now, of course, it varies depending on your placement, but maybe intensity, number of hours, days per week, maybe some of the generalities that are shared across the fellowship.
Yeah, so I can speak from the perspective of a fellow that's placed in the legislature, so either in the Senate or the Assembly. Within the Senate and Assembly, there's what we call the legislative calendar. So you can almost map out from ahead of time when you're going to have very, very busy days and when your days are going to be a lot lighter and you'll have a little bit more time to work on other projects. And so when you're first placed in November, December, it's kind of a little bit more of a slow time. And so in the legislature, and so that is the perfect time to get up to speed in your office, read all the things, take all the coffee meetings, meet all the people, and just get to know the legislature, get to know your office. And then in January, February, when the legislative session starts, is the time to get going. That's when bills are introduced. So you're talking with stakeholders, you're talking with lobbyists, you're talking with advocates, you're talking with other staffers, figuring out how to draft these bills that you're going to carry for your elected official. And then once, there's a deadline for bill introduction. So there's the mad rush to get your bill introduced, and then a short, deep breath for a few days or a couple of weeks. And then as the committee process starts, so once those bills have been introduced, they go and get placed into different committees or referred to different committees. So if you're a committee staffer, if you're placed in a committee, at that point, that's when you're getting going. And every day then is reading bills, thinking of them critically, trying to figure out, what are the merits of the bill? What are some gaps in the bill? Other things. And you're meeting again with lobbyists, stakeholders, advocates, staffers. So your days are filled with meetings. As it gets busier and it gets to deadlines again, your days may get longer. And the 9 to 5 portion of your day may be filled with meetings, and the 5 and after part might be filled with writing your analyses, which is your final product for a bill. And that goes on throughout the year. And then the legislative session ends sometime in August or September. And then once again, you get another time to take a deep breath and kind of work on what we call fall projects. So those are all the other things that go on in the office that aren't necessarily related to bills. But it can be site visits to see how previous bills were implemented, having lots of briefings with departments to see how they are implementing bills. And also, if you're staying in an elected official's office, figuring out what your legislative package is going to be for the next year, meaning what bills will your elected official like to introduce in the next year, so you can lather, rinse, repeat, and start the process all over again.
Thank you, Debra. Nichole, I know you spent some time in the executive branch actually prior to starting the CCST Fellowship. Would you mind sharing a little bit, maybe to contrast with the legislative work? What is a typical schedule like when you're in the executive branch?
Yeah, so before I started as a CCST fellow, I actually got to know, honestly, through an earlier CCST event called the Translator Showcase. I met one of an alumnus of the program, and she currently worked in the executive branch. We connected, and then I ended up serving as a fellow during my PhD in a governor's office that has a very long name. It's this California Initiative to Advance Precision Medicine in the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. But as in an executive branch office, that one actually doesn't follow as closely with the legislative calendar. There are places within that office that will track bills of interest, but they have staffers that will work on that, and whether or not you're close with them, it varies on your placement. In that office, it was a bit more standardized week to week. You kind of knew what was happening, and it wasn't as up and down as maybe like July is a really slow month in the legislature, because that is when the last hearings are completed and there's a period of recess. That isn't quite the case in the executive branch, but at the same time, you have a lot of ongoing projects that you're working on. And so it's a little bit longer term projects. You might have fire drills occasionally that you need to address, but overall, you're working on these larger issues. And another thing that I learned about the differences between the two was that there's some jurisdictional limitations in the executive branch as to what they can do and say that might be related to current bills. So they can't influence legislation. And as a result, there's this delicate balance of statements or responses or just general operations to make sure that nothing that they're saying on that side is influential, and a whole bunch of ways that they go about that as well.
Thank you. Andrew, I'm going to jump over to you next. We know that after grad school, right, everybody has a lot of options, and you're trying to figure out what path is best for you. And we also know that there are a lot of excellent science policy fellowships out there. So can you share a little bit about, besides CCST, what other options were you thinking about as you were wrapping up grad school, and what kind of tipped the scales towards accepting the CCST Fellowship?
Yeah, I was kind of a little bit all over the place. So I got a couple people from startups that were interested in me in terms of lithium-ion battery chemistry. A couple of bigger companies as well expressed interest, as well as maybe going to the federal government. So I was kind of all over the place in terms of where I wanted to be next in my career. I would say, so one note was there are other state science policy fellowships that I didn't apply to. So the only state one I applied to was CCST, but there are other ones. And kind of what tipped the scales with CCST was just how different it is of an experience. Like, I think going into industry wasn't so exciting for me because I felt like, kind of like what the other panelists were saying, like I really enjoyed science communication. I did a lot of outreach. I loved interfacing with different people across campus on issues like sustainability or issues like that affect a lot of different people and have a lot of interdisciplinary context to it. And I saw that this was an opportunity to really try that out for a little while and see if this is a good fit for me. And if I wanted to afterwards, maybe go into industry if that was something that I wanted. So I kind of saw CCST as an experience that'll be a really fun, new thing to try, which is what really motivated me to do it.
Thank you. Debra, do you want to share about what maybe the one or two things that tipped the scales, and what were you thinking about at the end of your PhD?
Yeah, so I left my PhD kind of knowing that I didn't want to stay in academia, but just the timing of when I had gotten my PhD, I would say when I was leaving or when I get my PhD, I hadn't yet heard of the CCST Fellowship. The only science policy fellowship I knew of at the time was the AAAS Fellowship in DC. And because I got my PhD in hand in March that year, the previous application period was the previous December or November for AAAS. And so I had missed it because you have to have your PhD in hand to apply for AAAS. And so I ended up actually pursuing a postdoc, it was literally the only postdoc I applied to. It just happened to be, very much in line with the work that I was doing in grad school. But I kind of went into my postdoc knowing, again, that I wasn't planning on staying in academia, but this is a chance to just, shore up my skills. In that time, just did Google searches, and one day CCST popped up at the top of one of my Google searches for opportunities, and looked in it, and I was like, oh, this is the one. This is what I want to do. And so applied for that, and fortunately was able to get into it, and actually never did end up applying for the AAAS fellowship. When I saw the CCST fellowship at the state level, and I think it was just what they offered that just spoke to me a little bit more than any other opportunities that I was looking at. So I pursued it and got it, and I'm very glad that that's what I did.
Us too. And glad that you're still here in Sacramento working in the policy space. Nichole, can I go over to you to ask, what did you know at the end of your fellowship year that you wish you'd known on day one of the fellowship? Kind of a tough question. Okay.
That one is tougher. I feel like I will have a better answer in an hour to that. But my first thought is that I think that one of my biggest learning experiences in my office was a very soft and tangible one, in that it was a lot of building confidence post PhD. I didn't realize how much my PhD experience had kind of whittled away at my confidence and my ability to do a task well, or communicate well, or assume that I wouldn't get any positive feedback. And that is something I am so appreciative of my placement office for, in that when I was in a committee. And so you write bill analyses for the committee, and then those are reviewed by all the personal staffers that have members in that committee, and then they provide vote recommendations on the bills based on those analyses. So the analyses are very important, but I had never written anything like an analysis before. So when I wrote my first one, it was not that good. And I told the person in our office, who was actually a CCST alum himself, Keith, that I said, feel free to rip this apart. You do not need to spare and mince any words. I want to know the brutal truth. And he goes, okay, but if your PhD experience was anything like mine, you probably didn't get a lot of positive feedback. So I would like to give some positive feedback as well. And I thought, oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, that is accurate. I just am so used to not getting that for 6+ years. And so I'd assume help me be better by ripping it apart, and realizing that it was a really positive space. And so I definitely would be embarrassed to look at what that first analysis looked like compared to what my final ones looked like. And that will never see the light of day because it was not public, but it is something that I left with a much greater understanding of how to communicate with confidence, how important confidence is in that communication. Because if you don't appear confident, then people will immediately doubt what you're saying a lot more than if you just convey that, then they trust you a lot more. It's tricky. It's definitely a power to handle carefully. But I think that I did not realize how much I lacked in that going into it, and was so grateful for the managerial style and all of these different experiences that helped me to gain that skill later.
Thank you for being so candid, Nichole. That was a great answer, though we'll welcome a different answer in an hour if you want to send that to us too. Andrew, Debra, do either of you want to answer this question too?
I can jump in. I think for me, learning actually truly what collaboration and communication is. So I would say, especially in my graduate program, I really I'm one of the few that enjoyed my graduate experience. And we talked about being collaborative all the time, but coming into the fellowship and working in policy, realizing what actual true collaboration is, not just saying, hey, you do your experiment, I do my experiment, and we'll put it together in the same paper. but more so it's a lot more of like working smarter, not harder. Like, hey, I don't know this. I'm going to pick up the phone and call the person who does, send an email, what have you. Let me assemble a meeting, get a team together of people who know all of these things and can put all of the puzzle pieces together, and not being afraid to say, hey, I don't know what you're saying. Can you please explain that to me? Or what is that acronym? Or just, jumping in, working together, in all of the ways of working smarter, not harder. I think the legislature, the policy world does not work well if we are not collaborating together. And that is all levels, whether it's Assembly and Senate working together, if it's lobbyists and staff working together, if it's committee staff and staff of a elected official working together, whomever it is, there has to be collaboration and there has to be like true levels of open communication going on. And so just literally learning how to pick up a phone and call somebody and ask for help, and gaining, like Nichole said, gaining the confidence to do that from the beginning to the end of the fellowship. And even now, 8 years later, it's a skill that I'm glad I got.
Thanks, Debra. Andrew?
I'll just add a couple small things. So one, I think my first analysis is public. So if anyone wants to see something really embarrassing that I wrote, it's on there publicly on the internet. However, I would also say people love the Science Fellows program and the other Science Fellows. So that was something that was like really awesome coming into the legislature with, where, have senators, assembly members, committee staff, even the executive branch people like already have an idea of this program and who you are, and knowing that you can contribute a lot. And that was like really welcoming to be a part of, as well as like, you kind of have a lot of power in a fellowship like this in terms of like drafting amendments, and you're really part of the conversations of like actually figuring out the policy and figuring out like what would be the best policy for the state. So I was kind of surprised on like the power that we have in some ways. Like, I'm just going to ask for these amendments and like force them on them, and they do it. So it's like kind of a cool way of like being impactful with what your skills are, and that helped teach me like the confidence that I needed, or that I gained from this experience.
Thank you. Our next question, thank you, Alyssa, for asking whether is CCST looking for just the hard sciences, more quantitative degrees, or if we're also interested in applicants that come from sociology, psychology, anthropology. And the answer is yes, we would love to see more applications from PhD students in sociology, psychology, anthropology, such important areas of study. Nichole, thank you for posting some resources in the chat that talk a little bit more about that. I'll open this up to our three panelists. I don't know if any of you have an example or a story or an opinion to share about, since you've been working in the policy space, the importance of some of the more social scientists, behavioral scientists perspectives in the process.
I guess I'll jump in and say, where I currently work in on human services issues. So those are, it's not a very science heavy issue area. It's, basically think of people who rely on governmental assistance for various different reasons. That a lot of those people fall under my purview, human services. And so I would say within my world, somebody who has a sociology or psychology degree would be invaluable. A lot of the services that human services provides are part of, what can be understood as like social determinants of health. And social determinants of health really fall well within sociology and psychology. So just on a content level, I think somebody in those worlds would definitely benefit where I am.
Thank you. That was a perfect example. Nichole or Andrew, do you want to add anything? Otherwise, I have another question.
I would say that one of my good friends from my fellowship year was an anthropologist, and I think that her perspective on all of the issues that we discussed and that came up, everything from like business to human health and just like everything was really amazing. And I think there's a great space for, as Debra said, anthropologists within these fellowships.
Yeah, same in my year. There's a person who has a sociology PhD, and that is super helpful, partly because I just the context of sociology is like much wider than what I was doing, where I was like, I'm gonna work on these chemicals that don't have feelings or don't have don't have the complications of humanness, right? Whereas sociology, in a lot of ways, there is that. So having conversations with him about this fellowship and even these experiences have been really helpful. And similar to Debra, I'm in housing and homelessness, so it's less like hard science heavy, and having a background in sociology or land use or anything like that would be really helpful.
All right, I'm going to try to squeeze in 2 more questions in our last 10 minutes. So the first one, I wonder if each of you could share one of your favorite or least favorite or unexpected aspects of your current work. So favorite, least favorite, or unexpected of what you do today, from your perspective of perhaps when you were applying and you think back, wow, I never expected that I would be doing X today. Nichole, do you want to start?
So least favorite, most favorite and unexpected experience of the fellowship. Okay.
Yeah, that or your current work. Your call, your pick.
Okay. I'll go with the fellowship, and say that during my time, I think I really enjoyed unexpectedly the meetings with different stakeholder groups, but when we really got a collaborative kind of negotiation centric meeting between maybe an agency and a personal office that was sponsoring a bill. And I did not expect, and I so appreciate that my office allowed me to participate in those meetings that felt way too important for me to be there at that moment, but that really taught me what negotiation looks like in a policy space and how that can be navigated both well and not very well, and how to learn from that experience. So I enjoyed that so much, and then I took that with me later as an experience that I would love to have more of. I would love to be at that interface and be a part of those negotiations in the future as a result of the experience I had during my CCST fellowship. My least favorite probably was some of the bills that I was analyzing were very dry and technical, and it just took a lot of reading over because I was in a very new policy space that I had, similar to Andrew and Debra, we all have done stuff that was very out of our background, and so that just took a lot more energy and time. And there were a couple where I was reading over, I'm like, I've reread this line 5 times. I still don't know what it says, and I need to get this together. But then, like Debra said, you can call someone else or reach out and figure it out collaboratively. And I think a favorite experience was probably being given the opportunity to help organize an informational hearing that we had. And even though it was on the impacts of COVID's impact on parks, I found a paper that talked about the health impacts of limited access to parks at that time. And it cited a pediatrician from San Francisco, and I was allowed to invite her to be on the panel. And so they kind of got to bring health into that conversation in a way that I don't think it would have been otherwise. And it was just a really cool moment.
Thank you. Debra?
Yeah, so I'm going to try and as condensed as I can, answer this from both like my fellow year and to now as well. So in my fellow year, I have one example that was both like my favorite and least favorite moment together. And so I was placed in the Senate Office of Research. And so that office does a lot of background not administration, but support research for the rest of the Senate. And so I was my director at the time allowed fellows to kind of choose a topic of their choosing and write a report on it. I wanted to write a report on electronic cigarettes and how they were regulated because my academic background was in drugs and drugs of abuse. This was policy. It was the perfect merger of my two worlds. I wrote the report. I thought it was an amazing report. It was one of my highlights because I got to do this thing that was like, this is why I came to this fellowship. Unfortunately, for political reasons, that report was never published. And so that was my least favorite moment, but I did learn a lot. So I still have a copy of it physically that I own. So I still have that report. I'm still proud of it. It's still my favorite moment making it, but in the process of, what ultimately happened to it, I learned a lot and learned how to navigate some of those things that, even though we're doing policy, there's still politics that are always swirling around. And I'd say in my current role or throughout 8 years of doing this, it's very cliche to say, but I'm going to say it anyways. I'm always learning something new. And I love that I really am. Right now, as I mentioned before, we have the legislative calendar. And towards the end of the year, we're in interim. So the legislative session is ended until the beginning of the year. And this is a time of learning. And what I've been doing a lot now is attending a lot of briefings and site visits. I love going to site visits. Site visits are where I get to go physically to a place that, has something to do, implements the bill, the policies that we create in the legislature, and see how they're working well or how they're just short of working perfectly, and what we can do to fill that gap. And there's so much to learn there. There's the things that I didn't even know that I needed to learn. And every year after year, there's still more to learn. And I love it.
Thank you, Debra. I agree. I think the amount that there is to learn is why we see a lot of our fellows stay in this field, because it's just always something new, and I think always a new challenge. So I'm going to switch to our last question. Andrew, I'm going to warn you, I'm going to go to you first. What one piece of advice would you share with these possible applicants? Maybe something that you wish you'd known back when you were applying. Andrew, and then I'll go to Nichole and then Debra.
So I might cheat. I might give you like two really quick ones. So I think the first
That's
one,
fair.
I think the first one is definitely reach out to people in the program or have been in the program. That's something I didn't do, but if you're serious, like everyone I've talked to so far has been really amazing. And on the CCST website, there's like ways you can contact people. So definitely do that if you're interested in the program, to talk to people. The second piece of advice was to be very clear about your motivations for the program and kind of why science policy is important to you, or what you think you do here, right? I think a lot of us had different opportunities where you could probably get paid a lot more in terms of industry and things like that. But I think going into policy has a very meaningful impact for me, which is what made it important for me. So understanding that for your application would be important.
Thank you, Andrew. Nichole.
I think I would just echo what Andrew said about reaching out to current or past fellows. They come, and don't be afraid to reach out to multiple. And if you don't hear back from one for some reason, try again, because we all have had very different experiences, both the amount of background we had before we started the fellowship and then what we did during and where we are now. And I think that trying to base your application off of maybe one of the fellows' experiences, it might make you think of it as more limiting, and to kind of figure out where you might be similar to someone else or where you resonate, and how you can build off of that for your application.
Thank you, Nichole. Debra.
I would say, as you're planning on applying, don't be intimidated by your own any parts of your background, whatever your academic background is, where you're from, if you're not from California, or how much actual policy experience you have. So I would say I had visited California before I came out here, never lived out here, didn't go to school out here, didn't know anything about California policy or politics. I knew very little actually about any state's policy or politics. I really knew it more on the federal level. And even then, I wasn't too involved in anything. But that's the point of the fellowship, is to get that exposure. So don't worry about your background and whether or not it fits. Just apply and make it fit.
I love that. Well said. That, I think, is the perfect ending. Thank you so very much to all of you who joined us in the audience today, and of course to my 3 panelists here. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise. Applications open on December 1st. I hope we see many of you apply. If you would like to watch this webinar again, or you have a colleague or a friend who's interested but couldn't make it, we will be posting it to our website. And please join us for the second webinar. So it will be on December 13th at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, where we'll discuss what's it like to be a CCST Fellow. Thank you, and have a great Monday.